I want to make a comment now about the monotheism of Yahweh as it is presented and developed in the book of Genesis. And beyond the creation accounts at the beginning of Genesis, we've got this unequivocal claim of the monotheism of Yahweh made over and over again. For example, a passage that I know you're familiar with, Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. In Exodus chapter 15, Moses asks this rhetorical question, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? And, the expected answer was, nobody. He goes on, who is like you in majestic holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? And again, the expected reply from the congregation was, nobody. And centuries later, the prophet Micah puns on his own name, Mikayahu, who is like Yahoo, asking essentially the same question. Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity, passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance? He doesn't retain his anger forever because he delights in a steadfast love. Well, you get this reflection on just a recognition of the missional character of the covenant people who'd been charged to declare his glory among the nations. And it's in that setting, for example, that Solomon prays in 1 Kings 8, beginning with verse 56. He's praying that God would indeed keep Israel's heart tender toward him, that God would maintain the cause of his servant Israel. And here's the bottom line, verse 60, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God, there is no other. Look at God's claim in Isaiah 45, verses 5 and 6. I am the Lord, there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you don't know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, there is no other. So the monotheism of Yahweh looms large in sort of the theological mission to challenge people's assumptions that I had to placate the storm clouds and the rivers that may flood or dry up just the gods who controlled my crops, whether or not my flocks and herds would calve and propagate for another generation, my own family. So the animism, the polytheism, the shamanism of the ancient Near East is being directly confronted in this prologue. Now I'd like to shift gears again for a moment and reflect on what I've learned to refer to as the creation mandate. And in this respect, I owe a deep debt of gratitude to John Murray, a Presbyterian theologian, and his published lectures on biblical ethics entitled Principles of Conduct. I've made reference to that before. At the outset, Murray emphasizes that while ethics may focus on behavior and conduct, biblical ethics is primarily concerned with the human heart, out of which are the issues of life. And the standard of biblical ethics is not a social survey of how the majority of self-identified believers may be doing in a given era. The biblical narratives make it clear that they're not reporting on the lives of plaster saints. Have you noticed that? Rather, Murray argues that our attention must be focused on the divine demand, not on human achievement. Upon the revelation of God's will for man, not upon human behavior. And so, what I'm talking about with creation mandates are those mandates that were given by God while humans still enjoyed just an unfettered relationship with Him. And they would include procreation and marriage. Genesis 1:28, the mandate there. Genesis 2:23-24. Marriage is the institution set up by God to accomplish the procreative mandate. This mandate establishes monogamy. It establishes the permanence of the marriage bond. Jesus picks this up. Find it in Matthew's Gospel and Mark. Paul develops it further in Ephesians 5. Marriage and procreation. Shabbat, Sabbath. Genesis 2:2. God did all that He did, and on the seventh day He stopped. He Shabbated. I think it's legitimate to translate that as rest, but rest is not the same as inactivity. It's not that God becomes comatose on the seventh day. I already read to you the claim of Jesus in John 5:17, that His Father works until now, and so Jesus is doing what needs to be done on Shabbat. So the cessation that is referred to in the Genesis narrative is from one sort of activity as listed in Genesis 1. These series of decrees, God said, and it was so, and it was so. It's a cessation for the purposes of celebration. Shabbat was to be a day of celebration, not just a day of, again, snoozing. Now, there may be some question raised in some of the commentaries as to whether the Sabbath in chapter 2, verse 3 is the same as the Sabbath in chapter 2, verse 2. Genesis 2:2. By the seventh day, God completed His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work that He had done. Verse 3. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it He rested from all His work which God had created and made. So, is this God's Sabbath? Is it a weekly Sabbath? Or is it humankind's Sabbath? Is it what we're to follow? And we'll chase that question down a little bit, but I just wanted to raise that here. So we had the creation mandate of procreation and marriage, of Shabbat. The fourth one would be of labor, the ordinance of labor. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, Adam is charged to dress and keep the garden. And when we remember that the ultimate goal of man's creation and endowment, and of the whole of creation and the endowment of the earth as the sphere and the platform of His employment, it was not the cultivation of His power and the cultivation of the earth's resources for the promotion of His own good and enjoyment, but rather it was for the magnification of God's glory. And then a vista of frontiers of employment opens up to our vision. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The whole earth is full of His glory. See, the chief incentive in subduing the earth and the chief end to be promoted by it would have been the discovery, the exhibition of the manifold wisdom and power of God. We'll talk more about the impact of this creation mandate, labor or work, in the next segment. But for now, I just wanted to put that out there, that work is not the result of the curse It is an opportunity and responsibility given to humanity even before the fall. And the last one I want to mention is the sanctity of life. Now, this really gets played out after the fall. It begins to come into the storyline in Genesis 4, the Cain and Abel story. Before the fall, there's no reference to this idea of the sanctity of life, because it's a given. But it's after the fall that this state, this expectation, God's righteous expectation, has to be expressed and driven home, as we will see it being driven home over the next section of Genesis and on through the Torah. So, our next unit is toward a theology of living biblically, and it really kind of teases out more this theology of work. So, see you in a bit.